brutal, totalitarian, militaristic, death cults and martyrdom. No, I'm not describing the Axis powers here. This is the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40k. The Imperium is nominally ruled by the Emperor of Mankind, but he's stuck on a golden chair, and in reality, the Ecclesiarchy and the High Lords of Terra rule over the Imperium, at least until Guilliman return. But how do these internal forces shape the Imperium? What makes the Imperium tick? And why doesn't anyone stand up to it? All of these questions will be answered and more as we analyze the ideology of the Imperium of Man. The Ecclesiarchy is the official cult of the Imperium. It is the living organism of the Imperium's main values: anthropocentrism, shunning psychers and mutants, absolute obedience to the state, and worshipping the emperor as a god. The Ecclesiarchy is not really a religion as we would conceive it. Virtues in most world religions include compassion, asceticism, and forgiveness. The virtues of the Ecclesiarchy, however, are mostly socio-political principles. The imperial cult shouldn't be compared to religions of our world, but instead ideologies like fascism. More on that in a moment. This is especially apparent when we examine some of the Ecclesiarchy's sub-organizations, such as the Sisters of Battle, the Fraterus Militia, and even their death cults. These are armed forces who commit violence in the name of the Ecclesiarchy and the Emperor. Real-world religions have missions, monasteries, and groups for the laity. There were military orders in some religions. Perhaps the most famous militant order belonged to the Catholic Church, the Knights Templar. Other military orders did exist, but only a few persist today and are mostly ceremonial. The rest have been abolished. Martyrdom is an expectation in the real world for both the laity and the clergy in many religions, but actively seeking it is often condemned. For instance, the Circumcellions of the 4th century were condemned for provoking people to attack and kill them. They saw it as martyrdom, but everyone else saw it as suicide. For the irreligious, death is treated as something natural, normal, but tragic. In the Imperium, however, death is glorified in a way not seen in most cultures. The Ecclesiarchy sends millions to die and encourages self-destruction on a daily basis. The militant zeal and insistence on dying in the Emperor's name reminds me of Umberto Eco's Fascist. Here's what he had to say about it. By contrast, the Fascist craves heroic death, advertised as the best reward for a heroic life. The Fascist is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people's to death. Yeah, it hits the mark. I'll touch more on the fascistic elements of the Empire in a moment. But for now, keep in mind that the Ecclesiarchy should not be seen as a religion. It is, however, the spiritual and esoteric side of the ideology. The Ecclesiarchy isn't grounded in reason or faith in a genuinely benevolent higher being. The Emperor of Man, even before he was put on the throne, was responsible for some of the worst crimes imaginable. The Ecclesiarchy is just carrying this torch in a more perverted fashion. This is the meaning of life for trillions of lives in the Imperium. Without the Ecclesiarchy, there is no Imperium, because there would be no meaning in life. The socio-political beliefs pushed by the Ecclesiarchy, which are maintained by the constant threat of violence and declarations of heresy, keep the people in check. In turn, the people willingly obey the Ecclesiarchy out of fear. Not just fear of the Ecclesiarchy, but fear that they won't find meaning outside of it. The fear of leaving the imperial cult only to find something much, much worse, such as chaos. It's a machine oiled by the blood of martyrs and dissidents alike. The Ecclesiarchy keeps the Imperium moving. For all of its claims about the glory of humanity, the Ecclesiarchy is the least humanitarian organization in the Imperium, and perhaps all of fiction. The DMV of the Imperium. DMV with tanks, lasguns, Gothic ships, and lobotomized servants. Yes, it's the highly bureaucratic government. Unlike the Ecclesiarchy, the Administratum has very little power. That might sound strange since the Administratum is in control of the entire military, but keep in mind that the military does nothing to maintain the status quo of the regime. Unlike the zealots of the Ecclesiarchy, or most of the agents in the Inquisition, the military battles external threats. Sure, there might be times to put down large-scale revolts such as the Severan Dominate, but the Arbites can handle most rebellion. In reality, the military is perhaps the weakest part of the empire. It is tempting to point out that the billions of soldiers defending the Imperium are important, because without them the Imperium would fall. This is true, but the military and government offices of the Imperium don't reinforce the ideology of the Imperium. If the Imperium was a democracy, it would still have the exact same army. It wouldn't have the bloodthirsty zeal or the hyper-militancy, but the army and the offices would mostly be the same. While the Administratum has no real power, it has a vital role in the Imperium beyond self-defense and government. It is a smokescreen for the real players in the Imperium. The Ecclesiarchy hides in plain sight and enacts the will of the Emperor everywhere at all times. The Inquisition operates in the shadows. Yes, many citizens are likely aware of the Inquisition, but much like the Gestapo, the average citizen doesn't know who is or isn't an Inquisitor. But the Administratum is a perpetual fall guy for the citizen. It's where you can seek refuge and feel like you're doing the will of the Emperor, even if you really aren't doing anything at all. It's what you blame when logistics fail, because it's just slow and inefficient. It's where you want to work, because you don't have to risk your life to feel like you're part of something big. Well, risking your life to a space bug, the Inquisition is still watching. If you blame the Ecclesiarchy, you're a heretic. If you blame the government, well, nobody can blame you. So long as you don't rebel or make your complaints too loud, you'll be fine. And you can't blame the Inquisition, because as far as you're concerned, you shouldn't be talking about it. So let's talk about it. Depending on your perspective, the Inquisition is either the most important or second most important player in the Imperium. They may not be first because the direction that the Ecclesiarchy pushes people at all times is the backbone of imperial ideology. The Inquisition is the sword of Damocles above everyone's head. If you have the ability to think freely, you're automatically a suspect. Everyone has free will though and can question dogma, so everyone is a suspect. This is exemplified to best in one of the sayings of the Inquisition: innocence proves nothing. To the Inquisition, your existence is sufficient enough proof of your guilt. For our discussion here, Ordo Hereticus is the most important of the Ordos. They police not just the general population for signs of heresy, but also the Ecclesiarchy to make sure it doesn't gain too much power. In this sense, one could say that the Ordo Hereticus is one of the most powerful entities in the Imperium. Nobody can question it, not even the Ecclesiarchy, because the Ecclesiarchy is policed by it. Still, the Inquisition acts on behalf of the Empire's principles, which are embodied in the imperial cult. Both of them see themselves as merely extensions of the Emperor's will, not their own will. The Inquisition ensures nobody has free thought, but not even Inquisitors themselves believe in free thinking. All potential threats are rooted out by the Inquisition. The total domination of every living creature's life is integral to imperial ideology. The Inquisition employs terror, and if terror isn't enough, execution to achieve this end. If the Ecclesiarchy is a living organism, then the Inquisition is its immune system. There are some other factions in the Imperium that aren't as important for understanding its ideology, but are worth mentioning for one reason or another. Firstly, the Adeptus Mechanicus. They maintain the technological knowledge of the Imperium. While most technology is forgotten and cannot be relearned, what is known must be preserved because once it's lost, it's gone forever. They are the only dissident faction that's allowed in the Imperial Creed due to necessity, not want. If the Imperium could get along without this cult, the Inquisition would have removed it a long time ago. But alas, their worship of the Omnissiah and cybernetics are both permitted. Cybernetics is permitted for a lot of laymen the same way we permit prosthetics in the real world, but tech priests go above and beyond, replacing their human flesh with steel. This stands against the anthropocentrism advocated by the Ecclesiarchy, but without the metal men of the Mechanicus, your ships, cogitors, and guns are going to fail. Secondly, the Adeptus Arbites. This is the ordinary police force, but like all police forces in totalitarian regimes, they have disproportionate amounts of power. They exist to keep the ordinary dissent at an all-time low. There isn't anything particularly special about them. They are basically just a diet version of the Inquisition. Thirdly, all of the nobility. They rule over a lot of worlds, but serve a similar function to the Administratum. They're allowed to do whatever they want as long as it's in the Emperor's will, and there are a lot of things that aren't within the Emperor's will. However, unlike the Administratum, some nobles, especially rogue traders, have special privileges that allow them to bend to the rules of the Creed. But if at any point someone above you decides that you're going too far to be independent, the Inquisition will ensure compliance. After all, corpses and servitors can't rebel against the Emperor's will. With all of these things mentioned, let's compare the Imperium's ideology to its most likely real-world equivalent, fascism. Fascism is an infamously tricky ideology to nail down since it seems like everyone did it differently. Unlike the modern saying that fascism means nothing because it's just an insult, I believe we can all recognize certain traits that make fascism unique. In particular, I think Umberto Eco's Fascism is a really good place to start. There are many different fascist regimes that differ, but they're all part of the same family. That family's patriarch is Fascism, so to speak. And in the fictional world of 40k, the Imperium's ideology is a child of Fascism. The Imperium hits all 14 points, but I'll highlight only the most interesting ones. Firstly, the cult of tradition. The Imperium certainly has a cult of tradition that is syncretic about its traditions. In the Imperium, there is only one truth, the Emperor's will. Nothing new needs to be discovered, as the ultimate truth is already here, but the Emperor's will can be manifested in local traditions. As such, the Ecclesiarchy allows its citizens to have a loose interpretation of this will if it follows local traditions. For instance, some planets used to worship a sun god. Well, if you take the Emperor's will and sun worship, you have a syncretic tradition, where the Emperor's will is manifested in the holy radiance of the sun or something. Secondly, the Imperial Creed offers one identity and a sense of belonging simply by being born as a human. This identity stands in contrast with those who aren't human, Xenos and mutants especially. The Imperium advances a notion of a grand plot by heretics and Xenos to destroy humanity. This plot is internal and external, and as such, humanity must be vigilant at all times. Lastly, the so-called Armageddon complex. The Imperium advocates for constant war. In fact, the setting's famous introduction even says, "In the grim dark future, there is only war." There is this vague notion of humanity winning in the end through endless crusades, but there lies an inherent contradiction. How can you have endless war and golden age of peace? The Imperium is the most evil, fictitious empire ever conceived. It is brutal, despotic, and morally repugnant in every way possible. Despite this, there are still good people in the Imperium, and not just good people that believe in the Creed. I'm not convinced you can be a good person and believe in the Imperium's ideology. But the Salamanders are remarkably charitable and aren't extremely zealous. Logan Grimnar famously butt heads with the Inquisition for trying to help people. Cephas Cain is a pretty decent guy, all things considered, especially when compared to other commissars. While there are a few good people in the Imperium, most of the citizens are either complicit in the regime's terror or just apathetic. Many even believe in it. They don't rebel because rebellion would mean instant defeat. Every citizen lives in constant fear of not just the Tyranids, but also the regime that's supposed to be protecting them. Make no mistake, the Imperium's ideology is extremely fascist, and the combined effort of humanity's worst ideas.